tech companies are going to want to look at projects that you've done, code samples, repos, or even ask you to do some coding for them. I'm looking to understand how you handle challenges, but it is helpful, to be prepared to share about yourself. The time commitment that tech companies might ask from you just in the recruiting process is usually going to be a little bit higher.
As we're talking about kind of hiring process and onboarding people, you obviously have a ton of insight doing the entire hiring process for Bixley with help, but really spearheading that. What are some of the differences, not only with our process, but just in general, someone that's a candidate looking to get hired in the tech space? How's the interview process going to look different for a tech-related job as opposed to maybe just any other position that you're going to go do an interview for?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences is how technical the screening process overall will be. So even when I'm first looking at candidates and their application comes across my desk, I'm looking at their resumes, I am looking for those technical capabilities, that they have experience in the specific areas or in the specific tech that we're using for our projects or testing suites. It gets very, very technical. So that's always a good thing to have on your resume, even if you're new to the tech industry. So we have actually hired quite a few people who are transitioning from the legal field, from medical, from all kinds of different backgrounds, and they're transitioning into tech. When you're architecting what your resume should look like, even if it's just a personal project, be sure to include that so that we can start to get a sense of what your technical capabilities are. And then going from there, you are going to have, again, technical questions in your interview process. A lot of tech is really based on your logic and reasoning skills, so you could have some unusual questions that you wouldn't normally see in an interview if you're working in another industry that you will quite frequently see in tech interviews. And then a lot of times, tech companies are going to want to look at projects that you've done, code samples, repos, or even ask you to do some coding for them as part of like a technical test. So all of that together, I think, really differentiates what you might see in an interview that we would have for a tech company as a programmer, as a software engineer, versus what you might see for a different industry. You would never really see stuff like that happening.
And it sounds like it's a lengthy process. So this screening to maybe even just get up to what would be more considered a conventional sit down, have an interview style process. Right. It sounds like it's a long process. It's not short.
It is a long process. And we've talked about it before. We have other episodes kind of detailing exactly what our recruiting process looks like. And I think, obviously, every company does it differently, but it's very common to have multiple rounds of interviews. And, a lot of times I will have the question coming back from the candidate, especially if they've gone through the interview process a lot. How many rounds are there? What can I expect? Yeah. That's always a really good question to ask when you're in that first initial phone screen, just so you can know how much time commitment the company is really looking for from you. And I think that is, a reality of the tech industry, is that the time commitment that tech companies might ask from you just in the recruiting process is usually going to be a little bit higher than what you might see in other industries.
It's probably going to be weeks, not days.
Right.
And asking those questions of, hey, how many rounds? That sounds like it's a two-way street, because it both shows intelligence on the part of the candidate that they're aware of time that goes into this. And for us personally, if someone asked us that, it shows that, again, you're aware. So as a company, maybe you want to look out for candidates that are asking those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's okay to be upfront about what you're available to do. So I recently had a candidate who's obviously applying multiple places, and he was like, actually, I have a couple tests that I'm doing for these other jobs. Is it okay if I schedule your test at such and such time? Okay. And, we want to be respectful of the time that our candidates have, the obligations that they have outside of their lot. I'm not expecting them to just focus on Bixley 100%. They have their own responsibilities and commitments that they're handling. So making sure that we're communicating clearly about what kind of time they can give me. Mm-hmm. And they're going to understand I'm actively recruiting. So if I hire someone before we get your test done, then, that's okay. But we're kind of having that balancing conversation to make it work for everybody involved.
That's good. And you mentioned being able to jump in and kind of talk through specifically Bixley's kind of screening, hiring process, onboarding, all that. There's a good episode for that to check out. But just as a highlight, specific to the interview, you're sitting down across the table from a couple people, or now, or digitally if you're a remote employee, that sort of a thing. What does that interview process kind of look like a little bit, and what could be expected, not only for us, but just maybe, again, in general? You've touched on this, lots of it, but the things we haven't touched, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, as a candidate, show up, be ready to be professional, show up, be ready to have a conversation. There have been times where someone's maybe a little bit more of a quieter personality or a shyer personality, and that's totally fine. No discrimination on personalities or anything like that. But it is helpful, to be prepared to share about yourself. So for some people, that's really uncomfortable when I ask you that question. So tell me a little bit about yourself. That opening question that I like to ask everyone. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard for us to talk about ourselves, but be prepared to do that, because me as the recruiter, I really do want to get to know you. I really want to get a sense of who you are as a person and what your experience is, and even what some of your hobbies and interests are. Like a fairly well-rounded picture. Like, I'm happy to know that about you, and that helps me in my assessment process. So if you are maybe a little bit of a quieter personality and that's a little bit more difficult, practice those types of questions to loosen up and have the two-way conversation that we're looking to do. And I think another thing to keep in mind with Bixley is the reason why we're hiring is not because we actually burn through people. Actually, we have a very high average retention rate. It's actually 5 years at Bixley, which is a very high number for any company, really, but really for a company
Even
that's tech for a contract firm, because we're working with so many clients. I mean, we really work really, really hard to make our job interesting, fun, give our people challenges, keep them growing, keep them on their toes, pay attention to what their needs are, hear what their feedback is for us. Like, it's very important for Bixley culture. And part of that is hiring people that we want to work with. So we have it on every job description: no jerks, no punks, no know-it-alls. And that's because they're not the people that we like to work with. So when we're talking about building Bixley culture, a lot of times that looks like, who is the person and how do they integrate with the culture that we're really safeguarding here at Bixley. And so that's highly, highly important to us in our interview process.
Yeah. And that could be something that differentiates us from another company. Not that the other company is incorrect, but when you come into an interview, I'm not hiring you, you're not hiring, we are not hiring at Bixley for a project that then is going to wrap in a year or whatever it is. We're hiring an employee that is going to be part of the company for years and years to come. Yeah. Whereas there are tech companies out there, and so as a candidate, you could be aware of that you might actually just be getting hired for a project, and then after that, it's one and done. Yeah. Years of being able to have an employee at a company is really cool.
To be proud of.
Be proud of.
Yeah. And it really ties into, I think, our culture of we want to invest in our employees as much as they give of their time and expertise, and really are giving that to the company as their effort of the team. We really appreciate that. So when we can point them in the direction of where they want their career to go, technologies that they're interested in, having those opportunities to grow and develop and gain experience, we are very much interested in investing back into them as much as we are really excited to have some of the best programmers in the world. And it's not an overstatement working for Bixley.
No, it's not. So that's good.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Bixley Tech Tuesday. If you have any questions at all about what we talked about today, how to get into tech, or anything else about our recruiting process, go ahead and leave those questions in the comments section down below. You can also find a link to our free custom software guide in the description to this video, and that will help you if you're looking to plan out an app. You can also check us out at Bixley.com and see all of the different positions that are currently available at Bixley. In the footer, there's a link that says join our team, or you can sign up for a free hour consultation with Chris.